And joining me now from Toronto, where she's here on a private visit, is the former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Vivian Bercovici. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Thanks for having me, Ellen. It's great to be here.
Great to be back in Canada. Now, could you say what the purpose of your private visit has been?
Sure, it's a private visit. I mean, look, I come back as often as I can. My mom's here. I have a daughter here. I have tons of friends and family and business interests that I pursue. So always lots to do. And I love coming back. Love it.
What has the new Israeli government had to face in the last 4 months, the major tests that they've had to face? Should we list a couple?
I think the first major test was surviving. And not only have they done that, I think they will continue to do that. And there's a lot embedded in that comment, because surviving means, Bibi predicted that they wouldn't make it past a week. The Likudniks in the Knesset were up to all kinds of, filibusters and fun and games that happen in parliaments. And they've conceded defeat in a way. So I think those are two really important tests, that the government has established itself, it's established its authority. It is seen not only domestically, but also internationally as being credible, very credible. And they're actually governing, they're getting stuff done, because it's such a bizarre, spectrum that sits in the government, right? It's really from far left to far right. And they're not going to find ideological synergy on many issues, but they can find, oh, here come the dogs. They can find pragmatic synergy, and that is what they're doing. And there's a lot that needs doing because it's been neglected for years. So,
for example,
Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was effectively gutted under Netanyahu, particularly in the last 5-6 years, restore their budget, restore their honor, start hiring adequately, giving them responsibility, for example. Merav Michaeli, who is a female Minister of Transportation, and she's the head of the Labour Party, and she is totally fantastic. And no, I did not vote Labour, but I admire her tremendously, and she is doing a great job with roads and bridges and those kinds of things, right? And not politicizing it, and not just allocating, money to places where her political supporters live, and not blocking infrastructure projects on Shabbat, which the Haredim were doing. So, I mean, those are just two of a gazillion examples of how things are actually working for the people in a way that they should. A significant issue is the very worrisome crime rate in Arab cities, towns, villages, which is really coming to a head. There was an incident, I'm sure you're aware of, a few days ago, where police officers were assaulted in Kafr Qasim, which is one of the larger Israeli towns within the 67 so-called Green Line. And it's got to be dealt with. And this government will deal with it. Exactly what that means, I don't think anyone really understands yet, but we cannot allow this spiral of crime in Arab majority towns and villages to continue. So those are like three kind of things the government does, right? That they're doing.
And what about the Sheikh Jarrah issue? It's very quiet now, and no one's talking about it, but there was you wrote a lot about it, and we covered it a lot when it was coming to a head during the summer.
Yeah.
You called for a compromise that no one will be satisfied 100%, but what has happened in that in your opinion, how did the Israeli government settle or kind of
So
quiet
I
that
saw
down?
I saw something the other day, and I don't know the details. I'm sorry, but I do know that the court, and it must have been a negotiated settlement, a compromise, so to speak, so that the inhabitants of these homes in Sheikh Jarrah can stay there for another 15 years undisturbed. And I haven't gotten into the detail of it, but it sounds like something that was going in the right direction, or a direction that I would agree with. I mean, there is sometimes, with these ethical issues, if you want to get really technical about it, and I've written about it, it's a legal issue, but it's not. It is a technically legal issue, but there are a lot of ethics and just decency involved. And you have to compromise. And I mean, to take a stand on whatever it is, 15 or 20 homes, and turn it into this issue of national importance and existential magnitude is just doesn't do anyone any good. Just doesn't.
You mentioned foreign affairs, the Israeli side. I wanted to remind our listeners that as far as the Canadian government's concerned, Marc Garneau, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, visited Israel and the surrounding Palestinian Authority territories, and literally 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks after the Israeli government was formed in first week of July. And Canada's position has been to sort of lower the temperature during the hostilities, and then give lots of money for bridge building to, charities or relief agencies in the West Bank and Gaza. But, I'd like to sort of unpack more about the Canadian government's relationship with Israel, and how you see its effectiveness if this is something you follow. So
of course I follow it. I follow it obsessively. I mean, even just that statement you just made, I would like to unpack 6 ways to Sunday, but we'll have to do one or two. So first of all, bring down the temperature. I mean, when the Trudeau government was elected in 2015, their opening salvo, and it was a salvo, on its relationship with Israel was, oh, we love Israel, and such an important relationship, and but we're going to return to being honest brokers. And Stéphane Dion really went to town with that one, as did the Prime Minister, as did others in the caucus. And what that clearly implies is that under Prime Minister Harper and his predecessors, we were dishonest brokers. So I personally and professionally take great umbrage at that suggestion. And it sort of, for me, falls into that kind of zone of meaningless platitudes that, in my view, this Prime Minister prefers to communicate. When I was ambassador, Minister Garneau came to visit, and he was, as are most people in the Liberal caucus, determined to turn the existence of Israel into some kind of equivalency exercise. So, the fact that Hamas unprovoked shoots thousands of rockets at Israeli civilians intentionally over a period of a week or two in May is somehow to be equated, measured against Israeli retaliations. Okay? And I think that is philosophically, politically, ethically wrong. So when Minister Garneau comes to Israel, as he did, and talks about turning down the temperature, I'd love to have a chat with him. Maybe you can arrange it directly and ask him what exactly he means. Canada, at last count, gives UNRWA, which is a very problematic by any measure organization, over $100 million a year. Okay, now 200 million?
No, total 200 million over the next 3 years.
Whatever. I mean, it's, they put things out piecemeal, so it's very difficult. It's kind of like with their spending to the $1 trillion debt. It's very difficult to kind of track and parse. But We are one of the largest donors in the world to UNRWA. We are a huge donor to other NGOs that does not get counted in the UNRWA total. And even the Europeans who have a, challenged relationship with Israel, West Europeans in particular, they have started pulling back their funding for UNRWA because it's openly acknowledged and understood that many of the services that they provide are viciously anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and the organization is committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. But Canada's there, giving out money like it's like there's no tomorrow. And this is not a partisan issue. This is an ethical issue. I personally think it's obscene. If you're going to fund UNRWA, you might as well fund Hamas directly, okay? Or Islamic Jihad. Stop playing games. Just fund them directly, and let's stop pretending. That's number one. When Prime Minister Harper was in power and I was the ambassador, and we had the 2014 Gaza war, and I was there on the ground. And the humanitarian crisis was, clear. There was a humanitarian crisis. Nobody enjoys it. And when people are dying and suffering, you don't want to start getting into well, it's your fault, right? So what did we do? We did a very careful due diligence of NGOs, non-governmental organizations that were capable of administering aid in the Gaza Strip, but that were not, frankly, corrupted or devoted to the destruction of the state of Israel. And we identified 3 of those organizations, all right? And we worked with 2 of them. So it wasn't that Canada was heartless or didn't deliver aid. We just refused to deliver aid directly to, in effect, Hamas. And we were able to be very, very helpful. And I think it is disingenuous in the extreme for the government of Canada. And I'm going to point a finger right at Minister Gould, Karina Gould, who every once in a while puts out these kind of, pablum sort of statements. We're looking into it. We're examining it. No, you're not. You're not. And I know you're not, because the whole world has looked into it and examined it. We have the curriculum. We know what they're doing. We know what's going on in many of their social welfare agencies. And you are deliberately not paying attention.
But I want to move away a little bit
Sure.
from that, because we only have a short time left. And I want to ask a couple of more issues. The Iron Dome support from the United States and the fact that it was held up. How is that playing out in Israel? Were people afraid that this new Biden regime government was actually not supporting defense of its closest ally? How did that play out?
I think people are very concerned always. And there's a lot of concern about the Biden administration for reasons I don't have to tell you. I mean, it's kind of obvious. And same concerns probably are quite deeply entrenched in Canada as well. But for Israel, the more radical wing of the Democratic Party is a big concern, absolutely. And so a lot of what went on with this, Iron Dome funding, in my view, was theater, but it was very powerful theater. And I'd be astonished if Israel is not working on its own capability to produce the batteries. It's Israel's technology, right? The Iron Dome and the batteries are Israel's technology. So if this kind of stuff is going to continue in the United States, Israel is going to have to develop a domestic capability to manufacture batteries, period.
Which brings me to the 4-letter word that starts with an I, is Iran. What keeps you up at night as a Canadian Israeli about the Iran file? And let's talk about that.
Everything. Look, I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. So like many Jewish people, I take very seriously when individuals, groups, and regimes threaten our existence. I don't take it as a joke. So the Iran nuclear capability is something that worries all Israelis. My personal view is, if it comes to that, the whole world's in big trouble. Honestly, like, it's not just going to be Israel. If it gets to the point that Iran strikes Israel with a nuclear weapon, the mess is going to be, it's going to spread. It's not going to be contained. Personally, and I think many Israelis would agree with this, I'm much more concerned with Hezbollah in the north, in Syria, and in Lebanon. They are in effect Iran. Okay, we're dealing with Iran up there. They're a fierce fighting force, and they're right on our doorstep. So there are hundreds of thousands of very accurate missiles hidden underground in Lebanon that can hit Israeli targets with precision. And we know that. That scares me and worries me a lot more than Iran's nuclear capability.
Well, the IDF spokespeople and IDF generals and even Bennett have been saying at the United Nations just a few days ago, last week, that, there's a proxy war already. We're ready. We're going to be making plans to hit back in the north of our borders. What are you hearing about that?
Probably the same stuff as you. Look, I was up north a few times in the last few months. There's a lot going on up there. It's always kind of, it's bristling. You can feel it. You can feel it when you're up there. You see the activity, you see troops, you feel the tension, you can feel it. And, but, I'm not inside the belly of the beast, so to speak. I don't really know what's going on. I'm not in their planning rooms, but it's no secret that is the most significant and existential. I don't think it truly is existential, but that is the most significant military threat to Israel now, is Hezbollah in the north. There's not much more to say about that. It's Iran. It's Iran. By the way, Canadians, also note that Prime Minister Trudeau years ago made the comment that he was not going to list the Iranian Revolutionary, the IRGC, which is their sort of the top echelon of their military, as a terrorist organization, because he saw them as being distinct from the government. Then he seemed to have changed his mind, and there is a motion on the table that is waiting to be approved and has been waiting to be approved for years. The IRGC is Hamas, but with the backing of a country. And Canadians should be very concerned that our government is not prepared to condemn the IRGC. They're the Taliban, they're Hamas, they're all the same family.
There is partly an IRGC entity on the list of terror organizations, but again, as you said correctly, not the one that you were mentioning. And also, we have to remember, a plane full of Canadian Iranians was shot down by that group, and 57 Canadians were killed. So we have to put that out on the table. All right, last thing, your book, your plans for your book. You were going to write one about how the Western countries are, deal with politics in Israel. How is that going?
So I've changed my focus a little, and it's going well, actually. It's going very well. This is going to be a big year in terms of getting out what I've had the opportunity and privilege to observe for the last 8 years, both serving as ambassador, but also being in the Middle East and having contact and interaction with a lot of people who are very engaged in these sorts of things, how Israel is treated by Canada and also internationally. It is different and it's treated differently. But I'm also working on launching a media enterprise, but that I'll tell you about next time.
No, you can't do that.
Yeah, I got lots going on. I got lots going on.
30 seconds to tell us what it is.
It's going to be fantastic. You're all going to want to subscribe. You're going to have to subscribe if you want to be informed.
It's based in Israel or based in Canada?
No, based in Israel.
English language.
English language.
Amazing. All right. Well, we'll have to talk to you about that again.
Let's talk. Okay.
All right. So report card on the Bennett government. It's 4 months. Give it a letter. So far, so good. You were very complimentary earlier. Let's give it a letter and end it there.
I'm going with A. We were in the trough. All right. I felt personally that this was probably the most important election in Israel since 1948. We were at a very dramatic and important, and most people with whom I interact felt the same way. We were at a juncture where it was a really serious fork. If we continue down this road of that we were on, the country was not going to. It was not going to be a democracy for much longer, in my view. We were seriously heading towards light theocracy, and economically not viable. I give this government an A because they've done what was considered to be the impossible. They are continuing to do the impossible. They're serious. They're motivated. They are as idealistic, I think, as a government can be in terms of understanding that they are there to serve the people and to get a job done and to restore some honor and dignity to the way government operates. And they're doing that. That doesn't mean that, Bennett doesn't have, a sneaky side, or that Lapid doesn't have a sneaky side, right? This isn't like a whitewash, and I'm not some kind of, naive Pollyanna, but I do know and believe that they understood that this is a critical moment for Israel. What kind of state? We're in this period now where, and I know there's a lot of thinking being done in Israel among intellectuals, among politicians. We're a mature country now. We're almost 75 years old. We're strong. We have the ability to defend ourselves. What are we going to become? What do we want to become? What kind of country? What kind of values? And it's very difficult to take a country whose psyche is completely geared to survival, right? To accepting that, okay, we're here. We're not going to cease to exist tomorrow, God willing. So what do we want to be? So I think that they have restored people. I know they have restored people's faith in government. They've demonstrated that Bibi Netanyahu, as skilled and brilliant and hardworking as he is not the only person capable of leading the state of Israel. And that's a really important step that had to be taken.
And that's strong words and important words, because I know how closely you admired him and followed Netanyahu, maybe still do. So important to hear.
I was in the past, and I still am a great admirer. But I think that it was time for the state of Israel to cultivate new leadership.
Understood. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the CJN Daily, and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Ellen. It's been fun.